Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a world you probably never imagined existed. The weird, wild, and wonderfully wacky games that medieval nobles just couldn't get enough of. Picture this, you're in a grand stone castle, torchlight flickering off suits of armour that haven't seen battle in decades. With nobles dressed in velvet and brocade sweating nervously under their ruffs not from the heat, but because they're about to engage in games that range from delightfully absurd to downright hazardous. You probably won't survive this one, but hey, that's what makes it so entertaining. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to drop your location and local time in the comments, because wherever you are, it's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes in the early morning light of a medieval castle. The stone walls are cold to the touch, but the day promises to be full of excitement. The air carries a curious mix, the smoky aroma from the kitchen hearth, mingled with less pleasant hints of unwashed nobles and a faint whiff of horse. Medieval hygiene wasn't exactly a priority when you were planning your next outrageous game. You stretch your arms, rub the sleep from your eyes, and step into a world where entertainment means more than just a quiet game of cards by the fire. The aristocracy of the Middle Ages had time lots of it, and a passion for spectacle. Between wars, political intrigues, and religious observances, nobles found ways to amuse themselves that could only be described as, well, wildly inventive. Games were not just games. They were a social currency, a display of power, skill, and, sometimes, sheer madness. When you think of medieval entertainment, your mind probably leaps straight to jousts and banquets. But the reality was far richer and stranger. Take jousting. For instance, yes, the classic image of armoured knights charging at each other with lances aimed to knock the other off their horse. It's thrilling, dangerous, and yes, occasionally fatal. The very phrase tilting at windmills comes from this, although Don Quixote's misadventures are a bit later, but for nobles. Jousting wasn't just sport, it was theatre, training, and a way to settle disputes or earn honour. The crowds would gather, cheering wildly, as helmets cracked and horses reared. Losing meant disgrace, but winning could elevate you to legendary status, at least until the next tournament. Yet, jousting that was just the tip of the iceberg. Imagine hunting, but not just your average deer or boar hunt. Nobles delighted in chasing more exotic and sometimes downright ridiculous prey. The peacock, with its ostentatious plumage, was a favourite until it became the target of a frenzied game of catch the bird, where nobles would scramble across slippery gardens and manicured lawns, trying not to trip over their own robes. The bird, of course, had other plans, flapping, squawking, and sending courtiers into fits of laughter, and occasionally bruised ribs. Cockfighting, meanwhile, was the medieval version of a high-stakes sports event. The prized gamecocks were treated like gladiators, trained and fed like royalty, and bets were placed with sums that could buy a small estate. Watching two feathery fighters tear at each other might sound barbaric today, but back then, it was a spectacle that combined gambling, entertainment, and a bit of superstition, since the outcome was sometimes seen as a divine omen. The stakes were so high that it wasn't unusual for nobles to cheat, bribe, or even resort to sabotage, making cockfighting as political as it was brutal. When it came to gambling itself, nobles had a special flair. Dice games. Card games, though. Cards were a later medieval introduction, and betting on just about anything could be found in the castles and courts. But unlike your casual weekend poker night, the bets were often wildly disproportionate to the risks. A single dice roll could cost you your favourite horse or your reputation. The games were steeped in ritual and complex rules that only the initiated fully understood. Some historians think that these games helped nobles practice the kind of risk-taking that made or broke political careers. Or maybe they just liked losing money in style. But not all medieval games were about brute strength or luck. The noble class loved games that involved wit and strategy too. Board games like the Game of the Goose were popular, a kind of precursor to modern board games, mixing chance with strategy and plenty of room for playful sabotage. And then there was chess, a game so revered that it was considered a metaphor for war and court politics. Interestingly, the rules of chess have changed over time, and nobles delighted in tweaking them, creating variants that could last for days or end in a spectacular upset. And of course, we can't forget the jesters, the medieval equivalent of stand-up comedians, magicians, and performance artists, all rolled into one. They played games too, but their role was unique. Jesters used humour, absurdity, and sometimes downright silliness to entertain, deflate tension, and remind nobles not to take themselves too seriously. Sometimes their games were elaborate pranks played on the courtiers, and occasionally, on the lords themselves, a misplaced slipper here, a fake snake there. Jesters kept the medieval party lively, proving that laughter was a game in its own right. As you wander through this labyrinth of games, you realise that medieval nobles weren't so different from us. After all, they just had different rules, costumes, and, frankly, a lot more feathers involved. Their games were about status, survival, and sometimes just pure ridiculous fun. Coming up next, we dive headfirst into the chaotic world of jousting, the sport where the horses are big, the lances are bigger, and the crashes are spectacular. Hold on to your helmets. You step out onto the grassy field, the sun beating down on a sea of colourful banners fluttering in the breeze. The air buzzes with excitement, the murmur of the crowd swelling as armoured figures prepare for a spectacle that is part sport, part war rehearsal, and part royal soap opera. Welcome to the world of jousting. If you think jousting is just about knights on horseback, smashing lances, think again. It's a full-blown medieval reality show, complete with drama, danger, and a flair for the theatrical that would make today's reality TV producers jealous. The joust was the ultimate test of skill and courage for a medieval noble. Imagine donning a full suit of armour, often weighing upwards of 60 pounds, mounting a heavily muscled warhorse, and charging at your opponent at a gallop with a lance aimed squarely at their shield or armour. The goal: to knock your opponent off their horse, or break your lance against their armour without losing your own balance. Simple in theory, terrifying in practice. One misplaced move could mean a face full of wood splinters, a concussion, or worse, a quick ticket to the afterlife. Jousting injuries were so common that some knights sported the same scar patterns across different tournaments, like medieval badges of honour. Historians still debate how much of jousting was genuine combat training versus theatrical display. Some argue it was serious preparation for battle, while others see it as a carefully choreographed show designed to impress royalty and intimidate rivals. Probably it was a bit of both. What's undeniable is that the joust was a big deal, so big that it became the centrepiece of medieval tournaments, drawing crowds from miles around. The tournaments themselves were lavish affairs. Nobles arrived with their entourages in caravans of horses, servants, and heralds. The grounds were transformed into temporary cities with tents, food stalls, and merchants selling everything from weapons to embroidery kits. Ladies threw flowers to favoured knights, who might be wearing their colours proudly on their surcoats. And it wasn't just about physical prowess. Chivalry and pageantry were key. Knights would often dedicate their performances to a lady, recite poems, or engage in elaborate rituals before the contest began. Think of it as a medieval version of WWE, with slightly less scripted drama, but just as much spectacle. Speaking of drama, let's talk about the dangers. Jousting was not without its mishaps. Helmets could get stuck, lances shattered unpredictably, and horses, bless their medieval souls, often had the worst luck tripping over uneven ground or getting spooked by the crowd. There are countless stories of noble knights being unhorsed in spectacular fashion, sometimes landing in the mud with their armour clanking like a dropped set of pots and pans. One famous jousting mishap involved a noble who was knocked unconscious mid-tournament, but was still declared the victor because his opponent was equally incapacitated. Talk about a draw with consequences. Not every noble was graceful in the tilt yard. Some approached jousting with a combination of bravery and utter recklessness. Remember, pride was on the line, and a poor performance could spell social embarrassment worse than a bad haircut. Yet, even the best could fall victim to a broken lance or a rebellious horse, and there was the constant undercurrent of risk. Some knights died from jousting injuries or complications later on. Though the sport was still considered an honourable way to die if it came to that. There's also a quirky bit of jousting trivia that tends to amuse modern audiences. Some knights actually jousted in full regalia that included ridiculous accessories like plumed helmets or even elaborate masks. These weren't just for show. They could conceal identities during tournaments, adding a mysterious twist to the event. Imagine the equivalent of a masked wrestling match with lances instead of leather gloves. Then there's the surprisingly competitive world of wager and gambling surrounding jousts. Bets were placed not only on who would win, but also on more obscure things, like how many lances a knight could break, or whether a horse would hold its nerve. The stakes were high, and cheating well. Cheating wasn't exactly applauded, but it happened. Some nobles would bribe squires to weaken opponents' armour, or use specially trained horses that were faster and more agile. If you thought poker night got competitive, medieval jousts took it to a whole new level. The cultural significance of jousting can't be overstated. For medieval nobles, it was an expression of their values, honour, bravery, skill, and status. Winning a joust could boost a knight's reputation, earn royal favour, and even lead to lucrative marriages. Losing, however, could be a social disaster, but hey, at least you'd have a good story to tell at the tavern later. Interestingly, jousting wasn't exclusively a male domain. While women didn't typically charge at each other with lances, noble women had their own versions of tournaments, including mock jousts on foot or horseback designed as courtly entertainment. They were also responsible for awarding favours and prizes, and their approval could make or break a knight's social standing. In later medieval years, jousting evolved into more formalised competitions with standardised rules and equipment designed to reduce fatalities. Protective gear improved, and lances were designed to shatter upon impact to absorb force. Still, it remained an adrenaline-pumping spectacle. Some tournaments lasted days, with knights competing in a series of contests like melee battles, archery, and foot combat, all under the watchful eyes of the court. Jousting eventually declined with the advent of firearms and changing military tactics, but its legacy lives on. Modern reenactments, Renaissance fairs, and even sports like modern-day tent pegging owe a debt to the thrilling, dangerous world of medieval jousting. As the dust settles on the jousting field and the crowds disperse, the nobles might wipe sweat from their brows, but their appetite for odd and extravagant games was far from satisfied. Next, we'll wander into the manic world of medieval hunting rituals, where chasing a peacock might sound glamorous, but usually ended in feathers flying and tempers flaring. Imagine yourself standing in the dappled sunlight of a vast medieval estate, the scent of freshly cut grass mixing with a faint tang of sweat from hunting dogs and horses. The nobles around you are decked out in their finest hunting gear, velvet doublets, feathered hats, and boots that have seen more mud than marble halls. But today, the quarry isn't your usual deer or boar. No, today, you're joining an utterly bizarre pursuit, the chase for the elusive peacock. Peacocks, those ostentatious, rainbow-feathered creatures, the original show-offs of the animal kingdom. They weren't just prized for their stunning tails that could shame the most extravagant noble attire. They were also integral to a strange, often chaotic ritualized game that only medieval aristocrats could dream up or suffer through. Peacock hunting was less about sustenance and more about spectacle, a lavish display of wealth and status. Nobles believed that the more extravagant their quarry, the higher their social standing. So while the peasants were busy chasing rabbits for dinner, the lords and ladies were chasing colourful birds that were far more trouble than they were worth. The game itself could be described as part hunt, part circus, and part exercise in sheer patience. Nobles would release peacocks into the vast, manicured gardens or enclosed parklands of a manor house. Then, the chase would begin, the objective, to catch the peacock alive, a task easier said than done. Given these birds' startling ability to take flight and their loud, shrill cries that could echo through the estate like a foghorn, the pursuit often devolved into a frenzy of nobles scrambling through hedges, slipping on wet grass, and colliding with each other in their haste. The spectacle was part entertainment, part test of agility, and part social game. Nobles jockeyed not only to capture the bird, but also to outshine their peers in the sheer flamboyance of their hunting style. Imagine Lord Geoffrey, in his finest brocade, tripping spectacularly over a hedge and landing face first in a mud puddle, while Lady Isolde, laughing behind her gloved hand, effortlessly snares the bird with a silk net. Moments like these would become the stuff of tavern legends and court gossip for months to come. There's a slightly less glamorous side to this peacock game, though the mess, feathers flew, robes were ruined, and tempers flared. Peacock feathers, once plucked in the excitement of the hunt, became prized trophies and decorations, adorning everything from hats to goblets. Yet behind the glamour lay a serious message. Showing off your ability to command such extravagant pursuits was a clear signal of your status and wealth, a demonstration that you could afford to waste time on the frivolous, while others toiled. Some accounts hint at darker undertones. The chase could turn violent, especially when hunting parties mixed with rival factions. There are stories of noble rivalries igniting after a particularly contentious peacock hunt, with accusations of cheating, sabotage, or even foul play. The bird, innocent as it was, often found itself a pawn in the complex game of medieval power dynamics. Now, as you brush the mud off your trousers and adjust your cap, you might wonder, did anyone ever just sit down and eat the peacock well? Yes. Eventually, peacock was served at lavish feasts, often with its tail feathers artfully displayed to impress guests. But catching it alive was the real challenge and the real entertainment. Historians are still piecing together just how widespread and ritualized these hunts were. Some suggest that the peacock chase was more common in certain regions, particularly England and France, where the bird symbolized vanity and pride. Others argue it was more of an occasional novelty than a staple pastime. whatever the truth. The game of chasing peacocks perfectly captures the blend of extravagance, absurdity, and social signalling that defined many noble entertainments. Interestingly, peacocks also held symbolic meaning in medieval culture. Their iridescent feathers were associated with immortality and resurrection fitting. Given the bird's dramatic appearance and somewhat theatrical role in these hunts, the peacock's presence at courtly events wasn't merely for show. It also carried spiritual and symbolic weight, reflecting the nobility's aspirations and ideals. While peasants might have rolled their eyes at such foolishness, these games helped knit together the social fabric of the aristocracy. Shared rituals, even ridiculous ones, created bonds, alliances, and hierarchies. The peacock chase was as much about maintaining those invisible threads of loyalty and power as it was about fun. Of course, there were more practical and less extravagant hunts going on too. Stags, boars, and hares formed the real meat of noble hunting. But chasing a peacock, that was the kind of ridiculous, flamboyant spectacle that made the medieval aristocracy stand out in the annals of history for their unique brand of leisure. So, as you step back from the chaos of the peacock chase, feathers stuck in your hair and laughter ringing in your ears, get ready. The next stop in our journey takes us to a game where the feathers and the fury are on a much smaller scale cockfighting. 2 birds, 1 ring, and a whole lot of medieval betting madness await. You find yourself standing in a sun-dappled courtyard, surrounded by nobles and courtiers decked out in their finest silks, velvets, feathers, and the occasional dubious wig that looks like it could host a family of sparrows. The air is thick with anticipation, a mix of sweat, dust, and the unmistakable tang of rivalry. Ahead, in a dirt ring marked by rough-hewn wooden barriers, 2 birds prepare to do what they were bred to do, fight for glory, honour, and the dubious entertainment of their human overlords. Welcome to the medieval world of cockfighting, where feathers fly, tempers flare, and fortunes are won or lost faster than you can say plucked. Cockfighting was a sport that perfectly captured the bizarre and brutal spirit of medieval aristocratic leisure. These weren't your average barnyard birds pecking at leftover grain. These gamecocks were specially bred, trained, and armed for battle. In fact, some had razor-sharp metal spurs affixed to their legs, designed to tear through feathers, flesh, and pride with equal efficiency. It's like a tiny feathered version of a gladiator match, with less armour and more squawking. The stakes at these fights were anything but small. Nobles placed bets that could rival the price of a manor house, and sometimes they wagered their prized horses or pieces of their land. Imagine your lord casually losing his best stallion over a chicken fight, and then trying to explain that one at the next council meeting. These weren't just games, they were serious business, where bragging rights and social standing were measured by the size of your winnings and the ferocity of your birds. Training a fighting cock was a year-round obsession. Handlers fed their birds special diets, exercised them rigorously, and taught them to be aggressive fighters. These birds developed personalities. Some were fierce and relentless, others cunning and strategic, much like their human masters. And like any good athlete, some had reputations that preceded them. Becoming celebrities of the cockfighting world, the idea of a feathered champion was no joke. Owners lavished attention and care on their birds, sometimes even mourning them like fallen soldiers after a particularly brutal bout. The cultural and social significance of cockfighting went beyond mere sport. In many medieval courts, the outcomes were interpreted as omens, signs from the divine, or portents of future events. Winning a fight might be seen as a blessing, while a loss could be a bad sign for political ventures or even military campaigns. This spiritual aspect gave the sport an almost mystical aura, adding layers of meaning to what might otherwise be dismissed as a bloody pastime. However, cockfighting was not without its critics. The church often condemned the cruelty involved, and some moralists labelled it as ungodly and sinful. Yet enforcement of bans was patchy at best, especially since many of the most vocal opponents were also avid bettors. The sport thrived because it was woven into the very fabric of noble life, and banning it outright would have been like outlawing jousting or feasting. The fights themselves could be quick and brutal, unlike the slow, strategic battles of chess or the choreographed chaos of a joust. Cockfights were raw and unpredictable. Two birds would face off, circling, pecking, and suddenly lunging with metal-tipped spurs extended. The crowd would roar or gasp as feathers flew and the dust kicked up. Sometimes one bird would dispatch the other within minutes. Other times, fights dragged on with near mythical endurance. One particularly colourful story involves a nobleman whose prized cock had been undefeated for years. The bird's prowess was so legendary that challengers travelled from distant lands just to face it. At one event, however, the noble's main rival secretly introduced a rival cock with a small bell tied to its leg, a distraction tactic to confuse the champion. The plan worked, and the champion lost. The scandal rocked the local nobility, leading to heated arguments, challenges to duels, and a few nights of questionable poetry written in taverns. Besides the spectacle and gambling, cockfighting also served as a bonding ritual among nobles. It was common for patrons to sponsor fights, host tournaments, and exchange gifts of prized birds. Rivalries played out through breeding lines and matchups, and handlers gained prestige along with their birds. The sport was part of a complex social web where winning meant more than just money. It meant influence, honour, and bragging rights at court. Outside the aristocracy, cockfighting sometimes spilled over into towns and villages, blurring class lines in moments of shared excitement. While peasants weren't usually allowed to own gamecocks of noble breeding, they often watched fights from the sidelines or placed small bets. In some places, cockfighting became a festive community event, complete with food, drink, and music. It was one of the few occasions where medieval social boundaries softened, if only temporarily. The practice has persisted into modern times, surviving bans and moral opposition in some parts of the world. Although today it's largely outlawed in Europe and North America due to animal cruelty concerns. Cockfighting still exists legally or clandestinely in some countries, a legacy of those medieval roots. Medieval nobles would probably be proud and horrified at how their favourite pastime lives on. So, as you wipe the sweat from your brow and watch feathers settle on the dirt ring, remember that this brutal game was more than just entertainment. It was a window into medieval social dynamics, where status, luck, and brute force clashed in a dusty arena. Next, get ready to roll the dice as we plunge into the world of medieval gambling, where fortunes were won and lost on a single throw, and the rules often seem to change faster than you could shout snake eyes. You're seated at a worn wooden table in a grand medieval hall, its stone walls lined with rich tapestries and flickering candles casting shadows that dance like mischievous spirits. The air is thick with the mingled scents of roasted meat, spiced wine, and the unmistakable tang of tension around you. Nobles in resplendent attire velvets, brocades and fur-lined cloaks lean forward, eyes glittering with anticipation. In the centre lie dice small cubes carved from bone or ivory, worn smooth from years of rolling, and a deck of cards. hand-painted with colours as vivid as their owner's ambition. This is the world of medieval gambling, a pastime that's as much about cunning and deception as it is about luck. Gambling was one of the most beloved and most dangerous forms of entertainment among the medieval aristocracy. Forget the casual poker games you might imagine. Here, fortunes were wagered with a breathless intensity that could topple kingdoms or destroy noble houses. The stakes were not mere pennies or gold coins. Entire estates, prized horses, or even political favours could be lost or won in a single game. The thrill of chance mingled with the ever-present risk of ruin, creating an addictive cocktail that lured nobles time and again to the gaming tables. Dice. Games were the heart of medieval gambling. These dice were not the perfect cubes of your modern board games. Many were irregular, their faces worn by centuries of use or deliberately weighted to favour certain outcomes. It was an open secret that cheating was rampant. Players would palm dice, swap them under the table, or use sleight of hand so practised it could fool even the most suspicious eye. Imagine a nobleman, flushed with excitement and ale, suddenly watching his fortune slip away because his opponent's dice always seemed to land just right. In some cases, entire disputes and violent brawls erupted over accusations of cheating, proof that gambling was serious business, not just a pastime. One popular game was called Hazard, which was essentially the medieval equivalent of craps, but far more complex and fraught with ritualistic rules. Players would bet on specific rolls, combinations, or outcomes, with a terminology that sounds like it was lifted straight from a wizard's spellbook main. Chance, pass, and nick. Navigating Hazard required not just luck, but a sharp memory and an even sharper tongue. Nobles who mastered the game could command respect and fear at the gaming tables. But dice were only the beginning. Cards were making their way into Europe through trade routes from the Islamic world. And by the late medieval period, early forms of card games were becoming all the rage in noble courts. These weren't your familiar poker or blackjack decks, but rather hand-painted sets with intricate, symbolic artwork. Each card was a miniature masterpiece, created by skilled artisans, sometimes even gilded with gold leaf. Playing cards added a new dimension of strategy and surprise to gambling, and the art and symbolism carried layers of meaning that could reflect everything from social status to political allegiances. Gambling wasn't confined to the gaming tables. Nobles wagered on nearly every aspect of their lives: the outcome of tournaments, the speed of a horse in a race, the skill of a falconer, or even the time it took a servant to complete a task. Betting was woven into the social fabric, a form of communication and competition that reinforced status while allowing temporary subversion of the rigid medieval hierarchy. Even kings were known to indulge in wagers, sometimes risking their royal dignity on a lucky roll. Yet, gambling was not without its detractors. The church regularly condemned the pastime, associating it with sin, greed, and moral decay. Clerics warned that gambling led to ruin and temptation, urging nobles to resist the allure of chance. But the lure was too strong. Enforcement of bans was patchy, especially since many influential nobles themselves were enthusiastic gamblers. Some clergy even turned a blind eye when games took place within their own halls, perhaps drawn by the excitement or the promise of a share in the winnings. Beyond the moral debates, gambling had real consequences. Many noble families were financially ruined by poor decisions made at the gaming table. Tales abound of lords who lost their estates, or worse, their honour, because of reckless bets. Debt could spiral quickly, and the social fallout from gambling scandals could be brutal. Yet the games endured, a testament to their irresistible pull and their central role in aristocratic culture. Amid all this, there were some surprisingly refined elements to medieval gambling. Gaming chests, for example, were treasured possessions. These boxes, often elaborately carved and decorated, held dice, cards, counters, and other game paraphernalia. They were symbols of status and taste as much as tools of chance. Carried along on journeys or presented as gifts to cement alliances, owning a beautifully crafted gaming chest was a subtle way of saying, I'm a player in more ways than one. And let's not forget the social dynamics around the gaming table. Nobles used gambling not just for fun or profit, but to negotiate alliances, resolve disputes, or display generosity. A well-timed gift of a winning stake or a gracious loss could curry favour and build friendships. Conversely, cheating or boasting could ignite feuds that lasted generations. The dice rolls and card shuffles were as much about power as pleasure. As you watch a noble roll the dice, you might wonder how much of this was luck and how much was skill or outright trickery. Historians still debate to what extent medieval gambling was regulated versus an underground world of cunning and deception. What is clear is that it was a high-stakes game of life and reputation, played out on dusty tables in candlelit halls. From the excitement and peril of dice games and card play, the world of medieval entertainment shifts next to a quieter, but no less intriguing realm board games. The games that kept noble minds sharp, fostered cunning, and sometimes caused as much political drama as the battlefield itself. Get ready to delve into the intellectual side of noble leisure, where kings and queens were not only played on the chessboard, but also sometimes lost in it. You find yourself once again in the glow of candlelight, seated at an ornate table carved from dark oak, where the whispers of nobles mingle with the occasional clink of goblets. Before you lies a chessboard, its black and white squares forming a battlefield where kings, queens, knights and pawns engage in a silent war of strategy and wit. This is the medieval court's favourite mind game, the game of chess, and tonight, you're not just a spectator, but a participant in the mental jousts that kept nobles sharp and scheming. Chess arrived in Europe from the Islamic world during the 10th century, and by the Middle Ages, it had become a staple of noble education and entertainment. The game wasn't just about moving pieces across a board, it was a metaphor for warfare, politics, and hierarchy. Each piece represented a class. The king symbolised the monarch, the queen the powerful consort, knights were mounted warriors, bishops embodied the clergy, rooks the fortresses, and pawns the common soldiers. Every game was a miniature reflection of medieval society, where strategy and cunning could topple kingdoms or secure alliances. What makes medieval chess especially fascinating is how it evolved into a game quite different from the modern version we know today. For instance, the queen was once a relatively weak piece, moving only one square diagonally, but by the late 15th century, the queen transformed into the most powerful piece on the board, capable of sweeping across ranks, files, and diagonals, a reflection of rising female influence and changing political dynamics. This evolution is still debated by historians. Was it a nod to the powerful queens of the time, like Isabella of Castile, or simply a way to make the game more dynamic? The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Chess wasn't just about leisurely passing the time, it was a proving ground for intellect and diplomacy. Nobles spent hours, sometimes days, in tense matches where every move was scrutinised, every mistake magnified. The game demanded patience, foresight, and an understanding of human psychology, not unlike the delicate negotiations that shaped medieval politics. Losing a game could mean a bruised ego, but winning could boost one's standing among peers, earning respect and sometimes even political favours. Alongside chess, other board games flourished in medieval courts. Tables, an ancestor of backgammon, was another popular pastime, played on a similar checkerboard with dice determining moves. Tables combined luck and strategy, making it accessible yet engrossing. It was especially popular among English and French nobles, who would wager heavily on outcomes. The clatter of dice and movement of checkers punctuated late-night gatherings, often accompanied by lively debate and playful taunts. Another intriguing game was Nine Men's Morris, a simple but strategic game involving placing and moving pieces on a board to form lines of 3. It was common enough to be played on tavern tables, cathedral floors, and even carved into stone benches. Its popularity is evidenced by numerous archaeological finds across Europe, and it was sometimes believed to have mystical or symbolic significance, with some medieval players attributing their fortunes in the game to fate or divine favour. Board games served a dual-purpose entertainment and socialisation. They created spaces where nobles could interact informally, test alliances, or even plot rivalries, all under the guise of friendly competition. Some historians argue that chess and its cousins were early forms of political training, teaching nobles the importance of patience, sacrifice, and strategic planning. After all, a miscalculated move on the chessboard might mirror a disastrous decision on the battlefield or in court. Interestingly, game pieces themselves could be works of art and status symbols. Elaborate sets crafted from ivory, gold, or precious stones adorned noble tables, showcasing wealth and taste. Some sets were heirlooms, passed down through generations, while others were commissioned from renowned artisans. Imagine a chess set so finely carved that each knight looked like a miniature warhorse, or a backgammon board inlaid with mother of pearl, shimmering under candlelight. The social rituals around board games added layers of complexity. Matches were often accompanied by feasts, music, and storytelling, turning gaming sessions into full-fledged social events. Guests observed matches, whispered advice, or debated moves, creating a vibrant atmosphere of engagement. The outcome of a match could influence more than just pride. It might sway negotiations, cement friendships, or spark rivalries. A quirky fact: some medieval nobles reportedly consulted astrological charts before games, believing that celestial alignments could influence luck. They might also have used lucky charms or recited prayers for success, whether superstition or strategy. It highlights how deeply entwined medieval leisure was with the beliefs and values of the time. Historians still debate the exact origins and spread of some board games, as well as their precise rules, which often varied regionally. What is clear is that these games were central to court life and reflected broader cultural shifts. The increasing complexity of games like chess paralleled growing sophistication in medieval politics and warfare, while their popularity across social classes underscores their role in community and culture. From the quiet tension of a chess match to the boisterous cheers of dice games, medieval leisure was a world of contrasts, of refined intellect and raucous revelry, strategy and chance, order and chaos. These games weren't just pastimes, they were microcosms of the medieval world itself. Next, prepare to enter a more physical and peculiar realm of medieval play, the bizarre and often hilarious sport of shin-kicking, a game where balance, endurance, and a high tolerance for pain were your best friends. Ready your shins for a medieval brawl, unlike any you've seen. You find yourself standing on the edge of a dense medieval forest, the kind that stretches for miles, filled with towering oaks and whispering pines. The scent of damp earth and moss hangs thick in the air, and the sound of rustling leaves is punctuated by the occasional call of a distant bird of prey. All around you, a lively gathering of nobles and attendants buzzes with anticipation. Today isn't just any day, it's the day of the great medieval hunting game. A spectacle that blends sport, social manoeuvring, and theatrical flair into a grand event that the aristocracy couldn't get enough of. Medieval hunting was more than a simple chase after game. It was a microcosm of power, privilege, and prestige in the rigidly hierarchical society of the Middle Ages. Hunting rights were jealously guarded. Only nobles could legally hunt certain animals like deer, boar, and hare, and to poach these royal creatures was a crime punishable by severe penalties. But beyond legality, hunting was an elaborate ritual, a public performance that reinforced social standing and political influence. The most prestigious form of this sport was the par-force hunt. The term, derived from the French par force de chien, meaning by force of dogs, perfectly captures the essence of this hunt, a long, exhausting chase where a pack of specially trained hounds pursued a noble stag or boar across varied terrain. Picture this: nobles mounted on powerful horses, clad in finely crafted leather and furs, following the eager baying of the dogs through tangled woods, open fields, and babbling streams. The chase was a test of endurance, horsemanship, and teamwork, not just for the hunter, but for the entire hunting party. Par-force hunting was highly ritualized before the hunt began. Horns would sound elaborate calls that communicated signals to the riders and dogs alike. The huntmaster coordinated the pack and the riders with a practiced hand, directing the course and pace. Pages and squires tended to the horses, ensured the hounds were well fed and rested, and kept watch for poachers or rival hunters. The spectacle was as much about the social dance as the pursuit of game. It was a moment when nobles demonstrated their mastery over nature and each other. One of the most striking aspects of medieval hunting games was the involvement of falconry, the ancient art of training birds of prey to catch game. Falcons, hawks, and sometimes even eagles were prized possessions, symbols of nobility and refinement. The falconer's skill lay in raising and training these birds, teaching them to fly high, lock onto their prey with deadly precision, and return obediently to their master's glove. The sight of a falcon diving through the air to snatch a startled rabbit or pheasant was as thrilling as the horse-mounted chase, and added an elegant flair to the proceedings. Falconry wasn't just about sport, it was loaded with symbolism. The bird's speed, sharp vision, and fierce hunting instinct mirrored the qualities prized in a noble hunter. The relationship between falconer and bird was almost sacred. Requiring patience, knowledge, and care, falcons were often named, and their training involved rituals and superstitions. Some believed the success of a hunt depended on the falcon's mood or the timing of the moon, but hunting games could get even more theatrical. Nobles sometimes staged mock hunts or venations, elaborate reenactments that included trained animals, scripted roles, and sometimes costumed participants. These events blended sport with pageantry, turning the hunt into a form of medieval theatre. They showcased wealth, cultural knowledge, and martial prowess in a format that entertained and impressed audiences, both noble and common. Interestingly, hunting games also served diplomatic functions. They were occasions for alliance building, negotiation, and the display of generosity. Hosting a grand hunt was a way for a lord or lady to show hospitality and political clout, inviting allies and rivals alike to participate in the festivities. gifts exchanged. During hunts, fine weapons, falconry equipment, or prized game could cement bonds or settle disputes. The social importance of hunting sometimes rivaled that of court councils. However, the sport wasn't without its controversies and challenges. Hunting was dangerous boar, could be savage adversaries, and accidents on horseback were common. There were frequent disputes over hunting grounds, with rival nobles accusing each other of trespassing or poaching. Historians still debate how much of the hunting culture was genuinely about sport versus being a tool for territorial control and social domination. Hunting games also reflected the medieval worldview that saw humans as masters of nature, destined to dominate wild beasts and the wilderness. Yet, there was a certain respect mingled with this domination, a recognition of the skill and bravery needed to confront these animals. The hunt was as much about balance as conquest, with rules and customs guiding how animals were pursued and killed. After the hunt concluded, the celebration truly began. The noble hunting party returned to the manor or castle, often with the game in tow. Lavish feasts awaited, where dishes featuring the day's quarry were served alongside fine wine and ale. These banquets were more than just meals. They were social rituals celebrating success, reinforcing hierarchies, and providing opportunities for storytelling and entertainment. Tales of daring chases and close calls were exchanged, sometimes growing in embellishment, much to the delight of all present. From the enduring tradition of par-force hunting to the graceful art of falconry, medieval hunting games reveal a world where sport, status, and spectacle intertwined. They were not merely diversions, but complex social rituals that shaped medieval aristocratic identity. And while the chase through forest and field was thrilling, the next game we'll explore takes a decidedly different form, the strange and often chaotic medieval pastime of cock throwing. Prepare yourself, it's a wild, noisy affair that perfectly captures the irreverent, raucous side of medieval fun. You find yourself standing in the centre of a medieval village square, where the air buzzes with anticipation and the chatter of a gathered crowd. The townsfolk are packed shoulder to shoulder, faces flushed with excitement, or perhaps the afternoon sun, while children dart between legs, trying to catch glimpses of the strange spectacle about to unfold. Before you stands a rough-hewn wooden goalpost, or at least the medieval version of one barely holding together, and scattered across the square are hundreds of villagers. The ground is muddied from foot traffic and occasional rain, with stray straw and scraps of cloth tossed about. Welcome to the chaotic, unruly, and downright brutal world of medieval mob football. Mob football was nothing like the polished, rule-bound sports we think of today. This was raw, unregulated, and often downright dangerous, a game where entire villages, or even neighbouring communities, threw themselves into contests that resembled mass brawls more than anything resembling modern soccer. The goal was simple: get the ball, usually a pig's bladder inflated and stitched into a rough sphere, into the opponent's goal, sometimes located miles away, often at the other end of the village or town. But the game itself was a sprawling melee, with few rules, few referees, and an almost complete absence of mercy. As you watch, you see players grappling, wrestling, and surging through crowds with the bladder clutched tightly. There's no dribbling here, only brute force and desperate tactics. Men, and occasionally women, fight tooth and nail, sometimes swinging sticks or hurling themselves at opponents to gain possession. Injuries were common: sprained ankles, broken bones, and even occasional fatalities were part of the spectacle. It was a test of strength, endurance, and village pride. Mob football was traditionally played during festive occasions, like Shrove Tuesday or other holidays when normal social hierarchies were temporarily suspended. The game offered an outlet for pent-up energy, frustrations, and rivalries, serving as a cathartic release for communities, sometimes. These games lasted for hours, even days, with participants coming and going as fatigue set in or wounds demanded rest. One striking detail is the scale of these contests. Unlike modern sports played on defined fields, mob football had a sometimes sprawling battlefield that covered entire towns, forests, or countryside. Goals could be the church door of a rival village, a riverbank, or a particular tree. The game was more than just sport. It was a communal event involving nearly everyone in the area, blurring the lines between player and spectator. A particularly quirky aspect was the use of the pig's bladder as the ball. Before rubber was invented, pig bladders were inflated and used for various games. They were fragile and often burst mid-match, leading to humorous and chaotic moments as new bladders were fetched, or the game ground to a halt while repairs were made. There are records of players fiercely guarding their bladder, sometimes hiding it from opponents, or even using tricks like slippery substances to make it harder to catch or kick. Historians still argue about the origins and exact rules of mob football, as it varied widely between regions and over time. Some versions were more like rugby, with players allowed to carry and throw the ball, while others resembled primitive soccer. The lack of standardised rules means that the term mob football covers a range of loosely related games, united mainly by their size, roughness, and communal nature, despite or perhaps because of its unruliness. Mob football had a significant cultural impact. It was a way for communities to assert identity, settle disputes, and bond through shared struggle. The game's fierce competitiveness reflected social tensions, but also the human need for play and connection. Nobles and clergy often disapproved, seeing it as disruptive, dangerous, and a challenge to order. Some even banned mob football outright, but these prohibitions were difficult to enforce given the game's deep roots and widespread popularity. One amusing anecdote involves a medieval English village where mob football reportedly led to an actual skirmish between two neighbouring towns so intense that the king had to step in and declare a truce, imposing temporary bans. Yet the villagers found ways to continue playing, sometimes under cover of darkness or in secret locations. This rebellious spirit is part of what made mob football so beloved. Mob football's legacy can be traced forward to modern sports like soccer, rugby, and American football. The chaotic origins remind us that these beloved games emerged not from refined athleticism, but from raw, communal energy and sometimes outright brawling. The evolution from mob football's rough and tumble contests to organised sports with codified rules is a testament to changing social norms and the human desire to channel competition constructively. As the sun sets and the last blows are struck, the muddy field slowly clears. Bruised and battered players exchange grudging respect, while spectators recount tales of the day's most heroic or ridiculous moments. The spirit of mob football, wild and unrefined, lingers in the stories and traditions of villages long after the bladders have burst. But our journey doesn't end here. Next, we move from the muddy fields to the lavish courts, where nobles gathered not to wrestle in mud, but to engage in mental duels of wit, strategy, and subtle social manoeuvring. The refined world of medieval board games prepare to explore chess, tables, and other games that shaped the minds and manners of medieval aristocrats. You find yourself stepping into a grand medieval hall, its walls adorned with vibrant tapestries depicting heroic battles and legendary knights. The light streams softly through tall stained glass windows, casting colourful reflections on the polished stone floor around you. Nobles gather in clusters, their embroidered robes whispering secrets of lineage and power. But their conversation isn't solely about politics or power plays today. It centres on a different kind of battlefield, the world of medieval board games, where minds clashed over carved pieces, and reputations were won or lost on strategy and wit. Chess, the undisputed king of medieval board games, commands attention. Originally imported into Europe from the Islamic world during the 10th or 11th century, it quickly became the game of nobility. Dubbed the Game of Kings for good reason, the game's symbolism was rich and complex. The board represented the battlefield, and each piece stood for a segment of feudal society: the king, queen, bishops, knights, rooks and pawns. But unlike the rigid social hierarchies outside, on the board the queen could suddenly become the most powerful piece, sweeping diagonally across the board, a dramatic twist reflecting the subtle shifts in women's roles in medieval courts. As you observe the match unfolding before you, two lords study the board intently, fingers poised over their finely carved ivory pieces. The tension is palpable. Every move signals hours of thought, anticipation, and risk. The player's expressions shift from confident to cautious, mirroring the ebb and flow of power struggles that chess metaphorically encapsulated. Every sacrifice of a pawn, every daring advance of a knight, held not just game significance, but subtle lessons in strategy, alliance, and patience skills invaluable in the complex web of medieval politics. One amusing historical note: some surviving medieval chess sets reveal pieces with quirky and even comical features. Bishops sometimes sported exaggerated noses or wore elaborate hats, knights rode strangely shaped horses, and pawns often had faces carved with playful expressions. It seems that even amid serious competition, medieval players appreciated a touch of whimsy, a reminder that games were also about enjoyment and social bonding, not just victory. Chess was more than just entertainment. It was also seen as a tool for moral and intellectual education. Some medieval treatises suggested that mastering chess honed virtues such as foresight, prudence, and courage, essential traits for a nobleman. It was a metaphor for life's challenges, the battlefield, where intelligence could triumph over brute force. However, historians still debate the extent to which chess functioned as a practical training tool versus a sophisticated pastime. Was it a genuine reflection of medieval warfare and politics, or more a gentlemanly diversion for the elite? Besides chess, another favourite among nobles was the game known as tables, the ancestor of modern backgammon, played on boards featuring 24 narrow triangles called points. Players moved pieces according to dice rolls, aiming to bear all their men off the board first. This blend of chance and strategy made tables wildly popular, not only in castles, but in taverns and public houses. Nobles wagered fortunes on the outcomes, and the rattle of dice mixed with shouts of triumph or despair filled smoky rooms. Interestingly, players often carried lucky charms or recited prayers before throwing the dice, hoping divine favour would tip the odds. Tables also reflects medieval attitudes towards fate and fortune. Life was understood as a mixture of human efforts and divine will, no matter how clever or skillful. Luck always had its say. This duality resonated deeply, making tables both an enjoyable game and a philosophical allegory. Some medieval writers even argued that losing at tables was a lesson in humility, while winning was a sign of God's blessing. Ideas that still make modern players chuckle. Another board game widespread during the Middle Ages was Nine Men's Morris, a deceptively simple alignment game played by placing and moving pieces on a grid. Though its rules were easy to grasp, the strategy could be complex, and it was played by all social classes. Archaeological finds show 9 Men's Morris boards scratched into castle walls, church pews, and even street stones, suggesting that it was a ubiquitous pastime that bridged social divides. The game's endurance is impressive. Some historians believe it may even date back to Roman times. Board games were not merely about competition, they played vital social roles. They offered opportunities for nobles to gather, converse, and display their intelligence in a socially acceptable setting. Winning a game could enhance one's prestige, while poor play might invite gentle ribbing, or, occasionally, sharper criticism. In some courts, chess or tables matches were occasions for political manoeuvring, subtle signalling, or courtship rituals. A lord's prowess at the board could be interpreted as evidence of his competence and leadership skills. A humorous medieval anecdote involves a knight who, confident in his martial abilities but clumsy with a board game, was repeatedly bested by a court jester. Rather than feeling humiliated, he turned the jester's victory into a joke, claiming that if the jester could defeat him in chess, surely he could hold his own in a duel. The story highlights that even in serious medieval society, humour and humility had their place. Education and literacy also intersected with board games. Nobles' children often learned to play chess and other games as part of their training, helping develop critical thinking and patience. This was especially important in a time when political intrigue, warfare, and alliance building demanded sharp minds. Games provided a safe space to practice these skills, reinforcing social hierarchies and ideals. However, board games also reveal a more playful side of medieval life, a counterpoint to the often grim realities of warfare, plague, and hardship. They were moments when the rigid social order softened slightly, allowing nobles and sometimes even servants to enjoy shared amusement. Carved boards and pieces were treasured possessions, passed down through generations, with some sets becoming heirlooms, bearing the marks of centuries of play. While chess dominated noble circles, many simpler games flourished among common folk, often adapted from noble originals. This diffusion of leisure culture helped blur social distinctions in subtle ways, though of course, access to finely carved sets and luxurious materials remained a privilege of the wealthy. As you take in the quiet concentration of the board game room, the flickering candlelight and soft murmur of players form a cosy contrast to the boisterous hunts and rough village games you encountered earlier. Here, in these refined contests of intellect and strategy, you glimpse the medieval mind grappling with order, chance, and power. And yet, just beyond these castle walls, another spectacle awaited, one that combined pageantry, martial skill, and a healthy dose of theatrical violence, the medieval jousting tournament. So tighten your gauntlets and ready your lance. The clang of armour and the roar of the crowd beckon us onward. You find yourself once again outdoors, but this time the setting is a vast, bustling tournament field outside a grand castle. The air is thick with the scent of horse sweat, roasted meats, and the faint trace of burning pitch from torches around you. Nobles and commoners alike crowd the wooden stands, their voices rising in excitement and anticipation. Heralds trumpet the arrival of knights clad in gleaming armour, their banners snapping crisply in the breeze. Welcome to the medieval jousting tournament, a spectacle that combined martial skill, social display, and a healthy dose of good old-fashioned drama, complete with the occasional pratfall and jousting was, in many ways, the medieval equivalent of today's extreme sports, only with more armour, horses, and the constant risk of being unceremoniously knocked off your mount at a gallop. The objective was straightforward. 2 knights, armed with long lances, would charge at each other across a narrow list, the barrier that separated their paths, each attempting to strike the other's shield or armour to score points or unseat them. A clean hit that shattered the opponent's lance or sent them tumbling to the ground was met with thunderoo. But jousting was far more than just a contest of brute force. It was a carefully choreographed blend of combat and ceremony, where knights displayed not only their martial prowess, but also their honour. Chivalry and fashion sense. Yes, fashion sense, because the flamboyant surcoats, crests, and colourful heraldic devices adorning armour were as much about making a statement as protecting the wearer. Knights often commissioned elaborate helmets shaped like dragons, birds, or mythical beasts, adding a theatrical flair to the proceedings that delighted onlookers. The origins of jousting trace back to military training exercises, where mounted knights practiced their lance skills to prepare for battle over time. These drills evolved into organised tournaments and festivals, becoming major social events attended by royalty and common folk alike. Tournaments were occasions to forge alliances, display wealth, and settle scores, all under the guise of sport and spectacle. One fascinating tidbit is the development of the tilt barrier, a wooden fence erected between the combatants to prevent horses from colliding. This innovation allowed knights to charge at each other at full gallop with more safety and precision, turning jousting into a true test of skill and timing. Before the tilt barrier's invention, these encounters were often chaotic and dangerous melees, with horses and riders clashing in a mass of steel and fury. Historians still debate the extent to which jousting tournaments influenced actual battlefield tactics. Some argue that jousting was primarily ceremonial and theatrical by the later Middle Ages, while others see a practical continuity between tournament skills and warfare. After all, a knight who could unseat his opponent with a lance had demonstrated horsemanship, accuracy, and courage, traits invaluable in battle. The social and cultural importance of jousting was immense. Victorious knights earned prestige, increased patronage, and sometimes even political advancement. Heralds recorded the outcomes in detailed rolls of honour, and poets and chroniclers immortalised heroic deeds in verse and prose. A knight's performance on the list could shape his reputation for years, influencing marriage prospects, feudal loyalties, and courtly favour. Jousting was also deeply entwined with the ideals of chivalry, a complex code of conduct emphasising honour, loyalty, and service to God and lady alike. The tournaments offered a stage for knights to embody these ideals publicly. Often accompanied by elaborate ceremonies of courtly love, ladies of the court might bestow favours like a scarf or a glove to their favoured knights, who would then dedicate their performance to that token, blending martial prowess with romantic symbolism. Of course, the joust wasn't without its lighter, more ridiculous moments. Stories abound of knights whose helmets flew off mid-charge, revealing surprised or even terrified faces. Others accidentally struck their own squires or lost their footing in mud puddles, much to the delight of the crowd. One amusing account tells of a knight so eager to impress that he forgot to lower his lance, resulting in a spectacular fall that left him muddy but undaunted, earning both laughter and applause. The tournaments were also a lucrative business. Organisers charged fees for entry, spectators paid for seats, and merchants thrived selling food, drink, and souvenirs Inns and taverns overflowed with revellers, turning the events into weeks-long festivals with music, dancing and feasting. The atmosphere combined the martial with the festive, creating a unique medieval cocktail of danger and delight. While jousting eventually declined with the advent of firearms and changing military tactics, its legacy endured. The romanticised image of the armoured knight charging into battle with lance lowered remains a powerful symbol in popular culture, inspiring literature, art, and even modern reenactments. The spectacle captured a unique moment when martial skill, social display, and theatricality merged into one unforgettable tradition. As the final horn sounds and the last knight salutes the crowd, you feel the echo of centuries of steel on steel, and the thunder of hooves fading into history. But the medieval world of games is not done with you yet. There's one more curiosity waiting something strange, silly, and utterly medieval, the mysterious and uproarious pastime of the egg dance. Prepare yourself for a journey into a game where balance, agility, and a good sense of humour were tested in equal measure, often amidst laughter, music, and the scent of freshly laid eggs. You're back in the vibrant heart of a medieval village, where the air buzzes with anticipation and the smell of fresh bread mingles with the faint scent of spring flowers. It's festival day, and the entire community has gathered in the village square, festooned with colourful banners and ribbons fluttering in the gentle breeze. Laughter and music fill the air as minstrels play lively tunes on flutes and fiddles. But amidst this joyful chaos, something catches your eye, a curious game that seems as much about balance and daring as about sheer silliness. Welcome to the medieval egg dance. Unlike the rough and tumble contests of mob football or the high stakes, armoured jousts, the egg dance is a celebration of grace, humour, and playful challenge. Imagine a dance floor marked out with chalk or rope, scattered with dozens of eggs hard-boiled, painted in bright colours, sometimes even arranged in intricate patterns. The goal to dance, skip, or hop through the delicate maze without cracking a single egg. Sounds simple. Think again. One false step, and a satisfying crack echoes, followed by bursts of laughter or groans from the crowd. Egg dance was especially popular during Easter festivities, where eggs symbolised new life and resurrection, a perfect occasion for games involving these fragile treasures. The tradition likely dates back centuries and was practiced across various parts of Europe, though its exact origins remain a bit of a mystery. Some scholars suggest it might have evolved from older folk customs celebrating spring and fertility, while others see it as a more localised festival amusement. The game wasn't just about careful footwork. Contestants often dressed in their festival best, sometimes donning elaborate costumes with flowing skirts, bells, or oversized shoes that made the challenge even trickier and funnier. Imagine trying to tiptoe through a minefield of eggs while wearing wooden clogs or a cumbersome headdress. Spectators roared with delight at every near miss and every spectacular tumble. Music played a key role in setting the mood. Minstrels and fiddlers kept a lively beat, encouraging dancers to keep moving and adding a rhythmic challenge to the proceedings. Sometimes the egg dance took the form of a contest or tournament, with participants taking turns to demonstrate their skill and agility. The winner might receive a prize, a decorated egg basket, a ribbon, or simply the glory and good-natured bragging rights that would last until the next festival. A particularly quirky tradition involved assigning symbolic meanings to certain eggs on the dance floor. Some were lucky, others cursed, and a few hidden deliberately in tricky spots to trip up dancers. This blend of superstition and playfulness was typical of medieval folk culture, where games often doubled as rituals meant to secure good fortune for the year ahead. Stepping on a cursed egg could mean bad luck, while carefully avoiding all eggs was thought to bring blessings. Historians still debate how standardised egg dance rules were, whether it was a widely practised, formalised game or a more spontaneous folk custom, varying greatly between villages and regions. The lack of consistent documentation leaves much to the imagination, but the lively descriptions that do survive paint a vivid picture of a game full of laughter, risk, and social bonding. In some places, the stakes were raised by using raw eggs instead of hard-boiled ones. This dramatically increased the difficulty and the potential for messy disaster. Spectators loved these moments, cheering as dancers narrowly avoided catastrophe or slipped in spectacular fashion, sending yolk and shell flying, sometimes. The dance was done in pairs or groups, requiring coordination and trust, making the chaos all the more entertaining. Even nobles got in on the action from time to time, donning their finery and attempting the egg dance with varying degrees of success. These rare moments where lords and ladies joined the village festivities broke down social barriers, albeit temporarily, and gave common folk a chance to see their rulers in a more human, fallible light. Imagine the surprise and delight when a lord tumbled spectacularly, much to the crowd's amusement. Egg dance's simplicity and universal appeal made it one of the rare medieval games enjoyed across social classes, while peasants and townsfolk delighted in the humour and challenge. Nobles appreciated the chance to partake in community celebrations beyond the formalities of court life. This blending of high and low culture, even if just for a day, is part of what made medieval festivals so vibrant and essential to social cohesion. Beyond the laughter and spilled yolks, egg dance symbolised resilience and renewal, themes central to medieval life, especially in times of hardship like famine, war, or plague. In a world where daily life was often harsh and uncertain, these moments of collective joy and playful challenge provided vital relief and reinforced communal bonds. As the sun dips lower and the final dancers take their cautious steps across the egg-strewn floor, the village square fills with stories and songs recounting the day's triumphs and blunders. Egg dance leaves behind not just broken shells, but memories of laughter, unity, and a shared celebration of life's fragile beauty. Reflecting on the rich tapestry of medieval games you've witnessed, from the chaotic mass brawls of mob football to the cerebral battles of chess, the thunderous spectacle of jousting, and now this delicate dance of eggs, you see a world teeming with creativity, social complexity, and above all, a deep, enduring humanity. These games were far more than mere entertainment. They were vital threads in the social fabric, teaching skills, reinforcing hierarchies, and providing space for expression and connection. They reveal medieval people as vibrant individuals who embraced play, humour, and competition with remarkable enthusiasm. So as the festival fades into twilight and the village quiets, carry with you the echoes of laughter, the thrill of competition, and the simple joy of an egg dance. History, after all, is often best told not just through battles and monarchs, but through moments like these full of life, colour, and a bit of messy fun. Now, as you lay down to rest, let the warmth of medieval mirth and camaraderie lull you into peaceful sleep, connected across centuries by the timeless spirit of play.